Let's start the hour with MS Now White House reporter Jake Traylor, our senior national security reporter David Rode, editor of The Insider Michael Weiss, and MS Now military analyst Colonel Jack Jacobs. David, this situation in the Strait of Hormuz seems to be of the president's own making. Does Iran have more control and negotiating power now than it did perhaps before this war even began?
It does in terms of the Strait, unquestionably. It has more economic power. It can strangle the flow of oil through the most important waterway in the world. 20% of the world's gas and oil passed through it before the war. Now Iran can stop that. And so it's extraordinary that all this is happening. And you're right in terms of the planning. I think if a broader coalition had been put together, some European nations, possibly Korea and Japan, who rely on this, and there was a larger number of ships, that would create more of a deterrence, a threat to actually retake the Strait by force. But instead, the Trump administration was, we're just going to use air power. That's all we need is air power. And we're going to go it alone without our allies.
Of course, Iran's military is very beat up, to say the least, put it lightly. However, I wonder, Michael, does, the fact that now the conversation isn't about nuclear capabilities and Iran's nuclear program. Now it's all about the Strait of Hormuz. Is that in a way a victory in of itself for Iran?
I think so. I mean, you heard it right there. They want to charge a levy or a toll for every tanker that passes through, between $1 million and I've heard even $2.5 million to be paid in either cryptocurrency or Chinese currency. And keep in mind, Anna, the IRGC is internationally sanctioned, including by the United States. So basically, every tanker, under whatever flag it might fly under, will be violating sanctions to enrich the IRGC. So these guys stand to make billions of dollars. Far more money than, in fact, they had lost under these sanctions regimes, depending on how long this state of affairs is going to continue. And you have the President of the United States kind of muttering on social media, well, maybe we'll enter into some kind of racket or economic program with the IRGC, and we can both charge tolls. I mean, this is absolutely unheard of.
Are you with them or are you against them?
Exactly.
And then there's the whole China component that you just brought up. There are so many moving pieces and dynamics and conflicting interests, it seems. Jake, the vice president, says there's no less than 3 competing 10-point plans circulating when it comes to the demands that Iran is making. Vance is even questioning the Iranians' ability to communicate in English. What does the White House believe Vance brings to these talks, expected on Saturday, that others, like, say, Secretary Rubio, can't?
Right, Anna. Yeah, Vice President Vance has long pushed for restraint when it comes to military interventionism in the Middle East, and folks at the White House are hoping that's what he can bring to the table on Saturday. White House officials we've spoken to say they really are kind of viewing Vance right now as this closer, this expert communicator who can best articulate a de-escalatory message when it comes to this now weeks-long war with Iran. But as you noted, and the Vice President spoke with press yesterday, and de-escalation really wasn't the theme of the conversation that he had. When he spoke about Israeli strikes on Lebanon, these deadly strikes, he referred to them as a legitimate misunderstanding and kind of mocked the Iranian regime officials, saying that they maybe didn't understand English or speak English too well, which may have led to some of the confusion. So either way, Vance has quite the uphill battle here. I mean, there are tick mark after tick mark of Iranian demands that the United States simply very likely isn't anticipating to meet, but they believe, White House officials are saying to us, that they think he is the best shot here to kind of temper down some of this heat that is, though 24 hours and more into a ceasefire, still prolonging.
Colonel, among the reported demands from Iran is for the U.S. to pull all troops from bases in the region. That's assumingly a non-starter for Washington. But the Wall Street Journal does say the president could reposition some troops based in NATO ally nations that he feels are not doing enough for this war effort. Administration officials also tell the Journal those troops would be transferred to countries that have been more supportive. What impact could it have if President Trump were to follow through with that plan?
Well, one thing is that they would cease to be as lucrative a target for the Iranians who've been trying to rain missiles down in American locations in the Middle East. So it'll pull them out of the area. It's clear that they were of no consequence militarily, either tactically or even strategically, during the entire time of this war, the ground troops in any case. So they can be pulled back and it will reduce their vulnerability. But we still have a fairly substantial contingent of NATO naval forces there. But they haven't been able to do very much because the Straits mined, and naval ships, no matter how fast they can move, are still going to be targets for Iranian missiles. So it's clear, as we've been discussing in this entire segment, that Iran seems to hold certainly the tactical cards, if not the strategic cards, because it holds the Straits of Hormuz on it.
That, and if this is causing more of a rift among NATO nations or having the U.S. turn on those important allies, is that concerning to you?
Well, it's been concerning ever since Donald Trump became president a long time ago. In the last administration, he's been talking about about NATO partners for a long, long time. It's been very disconcerting because the United States, although it is a linchpin of funding and was the creator of the NATO alliance in the first place, created it for a specific reason to defend not only Europe, but American interests in Europe. And with Trump's talking about how disutilitarian NATO allies are, merely makes it much easier for Russia to do whatever it wants to do in Eastern Europe. So it's pernicious for Trump to even talk about NATO. He's never talked about it in a clear way, which makes sense for American and allied national security.
Michael, you touched on how some of the actions we've seen just in recent days from this administration, this president, some of his rhetoric has actually, in effect, helped to strengthen some of U.S. adversaries, whether that is China, and of course, Colonel just brought up Russia, and then, of course, the sanctions lifted on Iranian oil. Does seem to have a counter effect as to the initial intention. And you look at the 10-point plan that at least has been reported that came from Iran, and I look at their demands. They don't seem to be softening. They're, in fact, it looks like almost going more extreme. Is there any real room for negotiating as we anticipate these talks happening on Saturday?
I'm sure there's room for negotiating. I mean, the U.S. line right now is, well, don't listen to what they're saying in public. In private, they're saying something different. But the Iranians, in their mind, have won this war, right? They believe that they are emboldened. They now control the Strait of Hormuz. They see desperation on the part of Donald Trump, who evidently was pushing for this ceasefire agreement, even whilst he was threatening civilizational erasure on social media. They think that they can drive a much harder bargain than they were attempting to do before the start of this thing over a month ago. And every indication so far has been, even though Donald Trump says we reserve the right to reactivate the war and we're keeping assets in place, all of the reporting suggests he is looking to de-escalate right now. And whether or not the ceasefire holds, the Iranians said that the Pakistanis pulled them back from the brink of retaliating because the Iranians don't believe that Lebanon was off the table. You know, J.D. Vance was saying, oh, they should have known this. Well, evidently they didn't. And in fact, we know from the New York Times, the Pakistani foreign minister who tweeted this announcement of an agreement or ceasefire, his tweet was read by the White House before he posted it, and you could even see it in the drafts of his tweet if you go into the kind of meta aspects of Twitter. In that tweet, he talks about Lebanon as being part of the ceasefire. So the White House read his stuff, approved it, but is now saying, well, no, he got it wrong, too. I mean, there's just such confusion. I'd like to think that somebody in some room in the executive, branch of this government knows what's going on and has a real bead on, like, what the actual terms are. I mean, David and I were joking we could come up with a few more 10-point plans on set right now because I don't even know what we're talking about. What is the term sheet here? Yeah,
and so what does that mean for negotiations on Saturday, David?
I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. And it's sort of watch what the Iranians do. Yesterday, they announced they were closing the strait again. Carolyn Levitt got up at the White House and said, oh, no, it's not closed. There's a great technology now, satellites, all these different things. So there's private firms tracking the number of ships that went through. Yesterday, 4 cargo ships went through. 4. None of them had oil, and not a single oil tanker went through. So that's the leverage, and I think in terms of the talks on Saturday, the Iranians are going to be very tough.
I mean, if the Iranians were to start charging fees or tolls for the Strait of Hormuz, which has been a big idea they're leaning into, and the president has suggested, oh, maybe we could work out a deal and we could both collect those fees. I mean, that opens Pandora's box, doesn't it, for other parts of the world? Could that trigger China to then suddenly say, okay, we're going to charge fees for the Strait of the Taiwan Strait?
The Taiwan Strait, the English Channel, the Strait of Gibraltar, this was an international waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, before the U.S. and Israel launched these attacks. So it's a massive change. And then the crypto element, people can make secret payments. And the Trump administration has, bolstered the use of crypto. So, and I see actually, the administration just wanting this to end. There will be payments to Iran, and they say there won't be payments, but they'll happen secretly.
Jake, Iran also wants the U.S. to back off its proxy groups, but there are reports that these militias are attacking key diplomatic hubs in Iraq. How worried is the White House about Iran proxy groups when it comes to these upcoming talks?
Yeah, I mean, look, essentially what we have here is another example of what David was speaking about. There's diametrical opposition in terms of what the United States is hoping for and what Iran is hoping for. Iran is seeking a total halt of attacks on its regional allies. The United States is instead insisting essentially to continue dismantling Iran's ability to support any of these terrorist groups of any kind of proxy. And so when Vance shows up on Saturday alongside Witkoff and Kushner, again, it's quite this uphill battle where these proxy groups, a real sticking point. What is left of the uranium, the enriched uranium, a large sticking point. The actual path forward for the Strait of Hormuz, a real sticking point for Vance and for the United States as they try to navigate this. This is something that likely right now they are formulating a way to bring this to the table, that there can be some form of compromise. But when we have us and Iran on such different sides of the spectrum here, there's a lot of ground to get towards before we can have a lasting ceasefire.